All right, hey everybody. As Ms. Diaz said, I'm Chris Johnson. I know most of you guys out here, but for those of you who don't know me or I don't know you, I'm a senior here at AHS. I'm in the band. I'm also NHS Vice President. I'll be attending Rice University in the fall, so I'm pretty excited about that. So like Ms. Diaz said, she asked me to do this Apollo lecture the week before spring break. And it was a real honor because I had seen a lot of them online, whether it was Mr. Gillespie's or Mr. Scalia's. They've all been really fantastic. So it was a really big honor for her to ask me to do this. So she told me the topic I'd be speaking about, which is, as you can see here, it's words that we use but shouldn't. And so the one thing that we agreed on initially is that there's definitely no deficit of words that you can pick from for this topic. You can probably walk on any high school hallway in America for a few minutes and probably hear a few that shouldn't have been said. So I went home that night and brainstormed. And so the next day I emailed Ms. Diaz and I asked her if instead of using a word, I could use a phrase. And so what prompted that is actually a conversation I had with a friend 2 weeks prior to that. So I was walking in the hallway with him, we were just talking, and we were talking about like Pokemon cards or Yu-Gi-Oh cards or something, and I told him, you know, I never bought the games, never bought the cards, I always had the games, because I didn't like spending money as a kid. And he turns to me and he says, oh, that's so Jewish, you're such a Jew. And, you know, kind of made me pause for a second, because I thought really because frugality is only a trait that one group has, and if anybody else exhibits that trait and they're Jewish, it didn't really make sense to me. So the more I thought about it, the more that I realized that that vein of thought, even if it's not expressed in exactly those terms, is perhaps a lot more common in our society than we like to admit. So as such, I've titled my section of this Apollo lecture, the That's So phenomenon, where the blank after the That's So can really be filled by any sort of group, any nationality, any ethnicity, any race, any gender, can really fall after that blank. But upon thinking about it further, I thought it'd be good to break it down into 2 categories. So this first group of that's-sos are those found in stereotypes or common conceptions in our society. The one I mentioned before falls into this category, as do many others. And the problem behind this, or at least one of the problems, is that it breaks down an entire group of people into one trait, and it makes that one trait emblematic of the entire group, and 9 times out of 10, it's usually not a positive trait. And so thus it reinforces these cultural stereotypes that we have of different groups in our society. The one I mentioned before, you know, Jews are greedy, Arabs are untrustworthy, blacks are lazy, those sorts of things, because it reinforces those things when we use these speaking patterns. Because we see in the world what we expect to see, and so when people use these phrases, or these idioms, we're reinforcing our expectations. And so instead of seeing people with an objective lens, we often see the worst in them as opposed to seeing them for what they really are. So the second group of that's-sos, I call the non sequiturs. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Latin, non sequitur literally translates to it does not follow. So for a brief demonstration, it'll be like if we went to Jesse over here, and I went up to her and I was like, hey Jesse, good morning, how are you? Tomato sauce. You know, obviously the second half of that does not follow the first one, so it's a non sequitur. So these are kind of in that same vein, in that when you break them down logically or think about them, they really don't make any sort of sense when you look at them for what they literally mean. These are often the laziest kind of that's-sos, and I'll get into that a little bit further. The one that gets tossed around a lot is that's so retarded, and not to infringe too much upon Jesse's territory in the lecture, but whenever I hear that, often used in reference to describe something like a book, oh, that book's so retarded, I just think to myself, like, really the collection of ink and paper and binding has cognitive functions and it can think and reason, because when you break it down, it clearly doesn't make any sense. It's non sequitur, it doesn't follow. Another one that gets thrown around a lot is that's so gay, and as Ms. Diaz made clear to a humanities student who is using that word in reference to a quiz, unless your quiz or piece of paper is attracted to another piece of paper of the same gender, your piece of paper isn't actually gay. So Ms. Diaz made that point clear. And so any of these really, when you break them down to their smallest components, they don't make any inherent sense. And the problem behind these is that they take these groups and make them synonymous with bad or awful or terrible, and they're not. These are often used as insults, to which I want to say that English is a broad language, which I'm assuming most of us speak, and there are lots of ways to insult people without doing that. In fact, I went online last week, there's like a Shakespearean insult generator. So instead of seeing somebody and being angry at them and saying, oh, you're so retarded, call them, you know, fawning, crook-pitted miscreant, because they'll be confused and insulted. And you won't offend anybody else besides them, you know, because there are tons of better ways to describe whatever it is you're trying to say without defaulting to these lazy that's-sos. But something I often hear in response to this is that, oh, people who use these idioms and phrases, they're not really being offensive, they're not trying to, it's not their intent, you know, it's just a phrase, it's just an idiom, it doesn't mean anything. And so in response to that, because I like to back up my assertions with facts and data, I was reminded of a survey that I'd seen online, or actually it's a collection of surveys. It's called Project Implicit, and you can find it at implicit.harvard.edu. But basically they do these quizzes, and after thousands of results, they find that people have an easier time associating groups that are often put into these AHS. They find they have an easier time associating these groups with negative terminology as opposed to positive ones. So I'll walk you through one that I took last week. They have, again, a whole section of these, and you can go online. It's free to take. It's really easy. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and the results are often interesting. So this one was an age or older versus youth implicit test. So the first step of the test is basically, as you can see in the screen, there's two categories, bad and good words. So this one is, of course, a bad word. So you press the left arrow key or whatever key is assigned for that. And so in the second phase of the quiz, they actually show you whatever subject it is that you're testing about. So in this one, as you can see, it's an older person, so you press the left arrow key in that one, and the next screen will be a younger person, and so they switch the sides around. And so they do that so there's no sort of interference with the data in terms of like one coming first, one coming second, the privacy effect and all that stuff. So they just pretty much randomize it so it's just raw data. And so the second phase, or the third phase I should say, is where the actual data collection comes in. And so in this one, as you can see, they have both the categories on there. The left one's a little bit cut off, but as you can see, they have young and bad on the left-hand side and old or good on the right-hand side. And so they switch around the categories and switch the sides. So what they find is that when people take this quiz, they have an easier time putting the young words or the young faces with the good side as they do with the older person. That's just for this quiz, for instance. They have tons of them. That's another picture of the third phase. And so these are the ones that I took, and these are results for everybody. So you can see they have Arab, Muslim, foreign versus non-foreign, straight versus gay, able versus disabled, and all of these. And what they found is that people have a better tendency of associating these majority groups with positive terminology as they do with negative ones. And again, you can take it online, it's really quick. And these are only implicit measures of people's reactions and attitudes as opposed to explicit ones. But again, the point behind the data is that when we use these speaking patterns, it reinforces, whether we realize it or not, our conceptions in society. And if we're going to function as a 21st century society and have these issues of injustice and equality, we're not going to be able to solve these bigger problems if we can't solve these smaller ones. Because individual change always starts with, societal change always begins with the individual and works its way outward. So again, you can find these online. It's just implicit.harvard.edu. Really quick. I found them interesting, the results. And they show you what your tendencies are too, so that's also interesting to see because it may not be what you expect. So on that note, I'll turn over to Jesse Scanlon, who's going to give her part of the Apollo lecture. I'll turn this off because she's in